Congresswoman Sara Jacobs has been a champion for reproductive freedom and equity in healthcare, and her new bill, the IVF for Military Families Act, would guarantee that service members have access to fertility care, including IVF, through TRICARE, which is the government healthcare system for the military. Now, at a time when reproductive rights are under attack across the country, this bill is a reminder that reproductive freedom also means the freedom to build a family, which is something that you would think the Republican Party of Family Values could agree with. Let's go ask her about it. Congresswoman Jacobs, you heard Trump call himself the fertilization king. You heard him call himself the king of IVF. And you were like, hold my beer. I'm going to hold you to that. And you introduced new legislation that you want Congress to pass to get on his desk to see if he actually signs it.
That's right.
Can you tell us, is that the story? Like, is that how that happened? What else is behind that?
That's a great story. It's not exactly how it happened.
Okay. What inspired you to draft this bill?
Yeah, so we've been working on this for a couple of years, actually. I represent San Diego, the biggest military community in the country, and I've talked to so many service members and their families who struggle with fertility issues. When I froze my eggs in my first term of Congress, I had a bunch of service members, mostly women, come talk to me about like how they wish they could do that before deployments, things like that. And so it just really got me thinking, like, this is something that we should be doing for service members and their families, not to mention I think everyone should have access to, accessible, affordable fertility treatments.
In order for things to be covered for service members when they get back from service, is there like a specific requirement for this? Because if they just have private health insurance after they get back, why can't they just use that to pay for their IVF?
Yeah, so all service members are covered under TRICARE insurance. It's a socialized healthcare system for our service members. I know. Actually, side note, members of Congress have to be on the exchanges. So we have the same healthcare as everybody else. I know people think we have some like amazing, fancy healthcare. We have the same healthcare as everyone else.
You have American healthcare.
Correct, yes.
Great. Good for you.
But service members are covered under TRICARE. And right now, to have access to fertility treatments under TRICARE, you have to prove that your infertility is service connected. And so you basically have to prove that you're infertile because of something that you had to do while you were serving.
How do you
which,
do that?
Correct, is very, very hard to prove. We know service connection is hard to prove for a wide range of issues, right? We saw this with the burn pits when we passed the PACT Act, what the PACT Act said was we assume that if you were in a place with a burn pit and you're having these conditions that it is service connected because it's so hard to prove. And so that's basically what this would say too, like you have access to IVF treatment, you don't have to prove that it's service connected, the reasons you have infertility.
So this is helping with continuous coverage that they deserve from serving in our military, that they're still covered and can make decisions for themselves about their own health care. Are there certain reasons why service members would be kind of more at risk or more in need of fertility care than others?
Absolutely. So 1 in 4 military families report having issues with fertility. And think about it, it makes sense, right? They are spending a lot of time away from their partners in their prime reproductive years. We're asking them to do really dangerous things around chemicals that probably aren't great for fertility, dangerous things that probably aren't great for fertility. And so, to me, it only makes sense that they have higher rates of infertility. But one of the things that we also know is that when you get TRICARE, the insurance coverage that military service members and their families use to cover something, often private insurance will follow. So this is also a way to try and nudge the whole market in that direction.
I was wondering what the long game was here, because Congress has both sides. Both parties have tried to pass IVF bills, but I say it with quotes because when the Republicans tried to do it, they inserted all this weird personhood language that was like protect IVF and then ban abortion.
Right.
And then the Democrats were like, nah, we're actually going to pass a real bill, and then Republicans voted it down.
That's right. So in theory, Congress could just mandate that insurance companies have to cover fertility treatments.
How civilized that would be.
Right. We've been unable to do that. But actually, the D.C. has passed that any healthcare coverage in D.C. has to cover fertility treatments, which means that members of Congress now have access to fertility covered under our insurance. So basically what this bill does is it creates parity so that service members are at least getting what members of Congress can get.
So I imagine that in drafting legislation, you often it's informed by a lot of your constituents or personal connections and relationships that you've built. Are there any anecdotes or stories of folks you've spoken with that you can share that informed how this legislation came together?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was talking to one Navy officer, and both of his kids were born via IVF, and he had to do that for medical reasons, but he basically wouldn't have had children if not for IVF, and his wife was also a service member and actually had to leave the service to find another job so that they could get insurance coverage that covered IVF, because it costs tens of thousands of dollars, out of pocket.
But for every piece of legislation, there's usually co-sponsors. How did it come about, the people who are now co-sponsors on this bill?
Yeah, I'm really grateful that this is a bicameral bill, so that means that we have it introduced both in the House and the Senate, and in addition to Senator Duckworth, we have Senator Murray in the Senate, and then Congressman Rick Larson in the House, who are leading it with me. And really it came out in conversation. They wanted to do something about this, we wanted to do something about it, and it really made sense to team up. On our side, Congressman Larson had been working on some of these, it's called cryopreservation, egg freezing stuff for a while for service members when he was on the Armed Services Committee. So it all kind of just came together, and it just made sense for us to try and push for it, especially because starting this year, members of Congress will have access to insurance coverage for IVF.
I love that this is coming from a place of equity, that you're like, I have this type of coverage, DC has this type of coverage, so service members should have this too. It's an equity issue.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stigma around IVF, particularly in the space of people considering it maybe separate from reproductive health care. And as someone who also advocates for all sorts of sexual and reproductive health legislation as well, do you see it as separate from reproductive health care, or is it all one and the same?
To me, it's all tied together. To me, reproductive freedom means access to the full range of reproductive health care, and that means deciding not to have a baby, but it also means having access to affordable treatment for when you do want to have a baby. And, I think about my own experience, freezing my eggs, gave me such a sense of agency over the decisions in my own life and having a sense of control in making those decisions for myself. And that's really true of the full range of reproductive freedom, right? All we want is to be able to make our own decisions about our own bodies and when and if we want to start a family, which is the most important decision many of us make.
Yeah. Can we just have the ability to make decisions over our own bodies?
You would think, yes.
Can you tell us what's ahead for this legislation and when folks can get involved?
Absolutely. So we've introduced this bill, the IVF for Military Families Act. We are hoping it will get a standalone vote, but so far that doesn't seem likely. So we're going to try and get it into the National Defense Authorization Act this year. We were very close to getting it into the National Defense Authorization Act last year, actually, and we got it passed through the House in a bipartisan manner, and at the very last minute, Speaker Johnson took it out. I know. So we're going to try again, and this time we're hoping the fertilization president will want to sign a bill with it in it. I know.
Oh my God.
But
why is that something that we can say in 2025?
It's
really,
so
it's
like
really
such a gross. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a gross way of saying that. There's so many less gross ways of saying it.
You can put that.
But all that means is that actually there's a lot that we need folks to do. So first of all, some of the most important things is sharing your own stories about how the full range of reproductive care has enabled you to make decisions about your life and how meaningful that's been, especially if you're a military family. That is really, really helpful. So please share your stories. The more we can humanize this issue and help people see that, this is not some arbitrary sort of morality fight, but actually about real people and the families they want to build, the better. And the second is, I hate to say it, but call your member of Congress.
They want to hear from you.
We love hearing from you. I love hearing from you. But also, we need, especially my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, to feel pressure to get this done.
Yeah, they need to hear that their constituents support the same legislation that Congresswoman Jacobs is putting forward. Tell your stories, which you're already good at because you follow GEMMA Talks, and call your congressional members, and not just your Democratic congressional members, especially if you are a blue dot in a sea of red. Call those congressional members too, because they're the ones who really need to understand why IVF is so important to women's decisions to choose.
And also, let's be clear, infertility doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Right.
And
doesn't
I'm sure
discriminate.
that many Republicans have used IVF.
Yeah.
So please, now is the time to speak up.
Yeah. Ooh, that was a good one.